Whittward Carver, Copenhagen Conundrum, the Quantum Quibble. In the pulsating heart of downtown Copenhagen, squeezed between a vintage bookstore and an art gallery that looked like a unicorn had vomited on a canvas, sat a coffee shop. This wasn't your average run-of-the-mill coffee shop. No, this was the percolating pendulum, where the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, and the conversations were as twisted as a Klein bottle. At a corner table, far from the madding crowd, sat two chaps who looked like they'd been teleported straight from a Victorian gentleman's club. One was Albert, a wild-haired fellow with eyes that sparkled like he'd just snorted stardust. The other was Niels, a man with a thoughtful gaze and a smile that could charm the pants off a mannequin. "Albert, old chap," Niels said, stirring his coffee like he was trying to solve the riddle of the universe with his spoon. "Your relativity is like trying to knit a sweater with a fork. Quantum mechanics, that's where it's at. It's all about the tiny buggers, the particles that make reality's fabric." Albert chuckled, his eyebrows doing a little jig. "Niels, you're as useful as a chocolate teapot. Time is a river, my friend. It meanders, it curves, it does the tango. You can't just hop in and out like you're playing hopscotch with the cosmos." Niels leaned back, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Ah, but Albert, what if I told you that with quantum mechanics, you could be in two places at once? It's like having your cake and eating it too. Schrödinger's cat, remember? Alive and dead, all at the same time." Albert waved his hand like he was swatting a fly. "Bah! Schrödinger's cat is like a politician's promise. It's both true and false until you open the box, and then it's just a bloody mess. Relativity, on the other hand, is like a good Swiss watch, precise, reliable, and it never lets you down." The crowd around them started to take notice. Heads turned, ears pricked up, and the hum of the coffee shop began to quiet down, like a radio being slowly turned off. A group of students at the next table who had been arguing about the latest philosophical fads now hung on every word, their eyes wide with wonder. "But Albert," Niels continued, undeterred, "quantum mechanics is like a magical dance. It's unpredictable, it's exciting. It's like trying to catch a greased pig at a county fair. You never know what you're going to get, but it's always a thrill." Albert laughed, a sound that was as warm and inviting as a hot cup of cocoa. "Niels, you're like a man trying to sell snow to a polar bear. Relativity is solid. It's dependable. It's like a good pair of shoes. You know where you stand with it." The crowd was now fully invested, nodding and murmuring in agreement with each point. A young man with a beard that looked like it was trying to escape his face stood up and declared, "I say, relativity makes more sense. It's like a well-oiled machine. You know what you're getting." A young woman with a mischievous gleam countered, "But quantum mechanics is so much more exciting. It's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." The debate raged on, with the crowd swaying back and forth like a pendulum, their allegiances shifting with each new argument. Meanwhile, Albert and Niels sat back sipping their coffee and watching the spectacle with amusement. Suddenly, Albert glanced at one of the mismatched clocks on the wall and let out a surprised, "Oh, would you look at the time? It's getting late, Niels. We should be off." Niels nodded, draining the last of his coffee. "Indeed, Albert. We wouldn't want to keep the universe waiting." As they stood up and made their way to the door, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, their eyes filled with awe and admiration. Albert and Niels stepped out onto the cobblestone street, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the warm, cozy atmosphere of the coffee shop. "Do you think it will rain tomorrow, Albert?" Niels asked, looking up at the sky with a thoughtful expression. Albert glanced up, his wild hair catching the breeze. "Well, Niels, if the weather is as unpredictable as your quantum mechanics, then we'd better bring an umbrella." They both laughed, their voices echoing down the quiet street. As they turned to walk away, Niels happened to glance back at the sign above the door. His eyes widened, and he grabbed Albert's arm, pointing at the sign with a trembling finger. "Albert," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "do you see what I see?" Albert squinted at the sign, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise. "Starbucks? Established 1971. But that's That's impossible. They stood there for a moment, their minds racing, their hearts pounding. Then, slowly, a smile spread across Niels's face, and he began to laugh. Albert joined in, their laughter filling the air like the sweetest symphony. Well, Albert, Niels said, wiping a tear from his eye, it seems that time travel is a bit more complicated than we thought. And with that they walked off into the night, their laughter echoing behind them, leaving the world a little bit brighter and a whole lot more confused. As for the crowd back in the percolating pendulum, well, they were still arguing about relativity and quantum mechanics, blissfully unaware that they'd just witnessed a moment that would have made even the most hardened physicist question their sanity. But hey, that's just another day in the life of the Copenhagen Conundrum.